starting, and I will confirm when we are live. And we are live.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone who is watching us. We're doing this live Media Defending Pluralism event hosted by Free Press Unlimited. My name is Maria Sadowska-Komlec, and I'll be the moderator of this event. Myself, I'm a Poland-based journalist who works for Free Press Unlimited, dealing with Europe and Eurasia. Before we move to our distinguished speakers, I'll give a brief introduction of what awaits you in the next hour. We will start with the series of introduction from European Parliament and European Commission and the very research that we have prepared and presenting today for the first time. And then we will move to the panel discussion where journalists from the European Union countries, together with a representative of the European institutions, will delve into the subject further. This also will be a possibility for you to ask your questions and get answers, either during the session or later in the description. And then we will have the final wrap up for everyone. And with that, I would like to give the word to the longest service Maltese MEP in the European Parliament, David Casa, who is a co-chair of Media Working Group. David will introduce to us the theme and what exactly the Media Working Group does in the European Parliament. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction. Esteemed guests, colleagues, thank you first of all for joining us. It is my pleasure to open today's discussion. Yes, media pluralism, the rule of law, and challenges faced by the media houses and independent journalists are issues about which I feel very strongly. Without true media freedom, there is no real democracy. And I hope that today's exchange will help us to reflect on emerging challenges and explore the actions media houses can take to combat these trends, as well as what we as politicians can do to support independent journalists and journalism. I would like to thank Free Press Unlimited for organizing this crucial discussion and preparing the report that will be presented today. It is through this kind of collaboration, through dialogue between legislators, the journalists, and civil society, that we can better address the challenges media houses and journalists face. Being a journalist has never been easy. Holding power to account can be thankless, and increasingly, unfortunately, it can be dangerous too. And this is not just the case in notorious countries outside the European Union. There are issues here, worrying trends here also that we cannot and must never ignore. The truth is that independent journalism has never been more strained. And while bigger media outlets might be better placed to stay afloat, smaller organizations are increasingly vulnerable. Financially, the situation is also becoming very difficult. Populist governments enact laws that pile on pressure, of course, and the pandemic over the last year and a half now also created huge difficulties in terms of cash flow. We are also seeing the continued use of abusive practices known as SLAPP, where journalists are silenced through vexatious lawsuits that threaten financial ruin, of course. And then there are more serious risks, such as physical threats, intimidation, and in some cases, murder. It is when journalists are isolated that they are at their most vulnerable. It is when institutions are hijacked. It is when these institutions, which are meant to be there to protect the right, the good, that they are used to protect the corrupt business interests and politicians instead of doing their duty, that a journalist is most at risk. These are the circumstances that led to the assassination of investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta. Ever since the assassination, the focus of my work has been obtaining justice for Daphne and working toward making it safe for journalists to perform their vital role in a democracy, that of holding power to account. It is largely because of the work of fellow journalists around Europe that we are slowly finding out the whole truth behind Daphne's assassination and the shocking involvement of persons at the highest level of Malta's government in corruption and money laundering connected to the murder. What is most worrying is that this is not an isolated case. The assassination of Jan Kuciak and his girlfriend in Slovakia certainly comes to mind. The truth is that we can never 100% guarantee a journalist's safety, but there are things that we can do. And when I learn of developments around us, I wonder whether we are even moving in the right direction. We must do much better. We must strive to be stronger with those that would curtail their citizens' freedoms for their personal gain. We have to be clear that when it comes to respect for media freedom, there can be no room for maneuver. I address you today also as part of the European Parliament's Media Working Group, which I co-chair together with my friend and colleague Ramona Stugariu, who will be, of course, be speaking later. The Media Working Group consists of 10 members of the European Parliament from across political groups. Despite our political differences on many other issues, we are all dedicated to ensure a media pluralism, to create a favorable environment for local and independent media, and to limiting government's attempts to controlling and exploiting the media for their own benefit. For years now, many of us have worked towards ending the harassment of journalists through slaps lawsuits. Today, we remain united in our position that such practices must be urgently addressed at EU level. We will be hearing from the Commission today, and with that in mind, I must thank Commission Vice President Jourova. She is, and I believe this, she is a true champion for media freedom in Europe. She understands the challenges to media freedom and has shown openness to taking action when needed. I am aware that Mrs. Renate Nicolai will cover the current work program of the Commission in more detail following the presentation of the report. And therefore, I'll be very happy to hear what she has to say. And now, finally, I give the floor to Tim from the Freedom Press and Free Press Unlimited, who will be presenting the study, its conclusions and recommendations. So thank you once more for having me here.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the European Parliament for this inter-party unity on issues of media safety and journalist safety and media pluralism. Team, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Mr. Casa, for these insightful words and for all your work. I'll share my screen to have some slides on. Yes. So I'd also like to thank all of you who are watching now. I'm very happy to be here to present our new publication, Independent Journalism in Context of Shrinking Civic Space. This is a very important topic because unfortunately, shrinking civic space is happening in an increasing number of countries, including in Europe. And for media, this can take various forms, including financial, so limits to the ability of media to generate revenue, dependency leading to self-censorship, or even capture, takeover of media by political actors, smear campaigns, and delegitimization of the right for media to be critical of power holders, or restrictions for journalists to access information. But journalists can also push back against this development. So with this study, we wanted to gather various strategies that media can use to do so effectively. We hope that this will provide inspiration to other media practitioners and the knowledge to media support organizations and policymakers of what efforts on the part of media are effectively pushing back against these negative developments and should be supported and facilitated. We've gone about this with a case study approach in our publication. You can see here our 5 case studies. These each focus on a different main theme or strategy that is illustrated by the case. I'll won't go into all of them, of course, but one example is the cross-border cooperation that CRIC in Serbia did with Bulgarian investigative outlet BIFO in order to access information on a Serbian politician without alarming them of the ongoing investigation, which might have led to efforts to suppress the story. Briefly, this is the team of CRIC, just to add a nice concrete touch to it. All these case studies have been contributed by media experts with a background in the country that they write about. So in these chapters, you can find a thick description of the context, which allows you as a reader to understand the challenges and strategies described there in their context. Shrinking civic space manifests itself differently in different countries, so it's important that readers can see to what extent the context they work in is similar to these in these cases in order to most effectively learn from them. Now, of course, beyond these cases, we aim to make these lessons more widely applicable. So a few things can be observed across cases. For instance, the importance of the media landscape as a whole, which stood out in all cases, despite the fact that they deliberately focused on one specific media outlet, as well as the fact that this problem can spread, also shown in several cases, which refers to similar actors despite being based in the same country. This highlights how important it is to address the problem, because having it fester unfettered is setting precedents. Most importantly, however, we found that all the strategies that we identified across cases could be attributed to one of 3 objectives. These should be a given in a free and pluriform media landscape, but unfortunately often aren't the case. These 3, here is an overview of all the strategies we gathered. Suffice to say, I won't go into all of them now. You can find them in the report. But these 3 objectives are, first of all, making sure that all audiences have access to independent media. This is often in contexts where illiberal governments try to insulate parts of the population, parts of the public from independent information, from media content that does not promote a pro-government narrative. But it's also important to note that the remaining national media are often primarily embedded in educated urban capital city environments, and that it's an important challenge for which we've noted important efforts as well to reach out to other demographics, to other parts of the public. That's why one of the recommended strategies that I'd like to highlight here is for national media to reach out to local media, pick up on the stories of their investigative work. We've mainly included strategies for media, but for each objective, also one call to action to provoke discussion for support organizations and policymakers. I'll highlight this one as an example, namely one direction of thinking could be to set up a fund that helps national and local media outlets to collaborate. For instance, helping national media outlets to pay local media outlets to reprint some of their investigative content, which would address both the financial precarity of local media outlets as well as providing national media outlets with content that is relevant to a broader range of audiences. Now, The second objective, it's important here to note that audiences, of course, need to recognize the difference between reliable and unreliable information and to value independent media. This is not easy in contexts where captured media, as well as leaders on a variety of platforms, continuously smear independent media, delegitimize their actions, and call into question their right to be critical or even the truthfulness of what they write. Beyond audiences and policymakers, media have a role to play here too. For instance, through quality fact-checking programs or providing audiences with tools. And of course, by adhering strictly to clear professional standards that set them apart from wider tabloid media. Lastly, independent media need to hold power holders to account, which concretely consists of two things: being able to access information and dealing with limits that are imposed on the ability of stories to create impact after they're published. When it comes to accessing information and dealing with the suppression of stories, policymakers do have a role to play, of course. For instance, by enforcing rules on transparency and checking the behavior of national governments in the EU that seek to limit that. But we also describe several strategies for media, which involve various ways of engaging and activating audiences. With this, which will be filled in more concretely by our interesting speakers later on the panel, two of which are featured in the case studies of this publication, actually. I'd like to say that I'm looking forward to the various perspectives that we'll hear this hour in the rest of the session. And I'd like to stress that for the rest of the session and all of you listening, that when independent media are able and enabled to meet these objectives as they should in any free media landscape, in any democratic society, to meet these objectives successfully, they can contribute to keeping civic space open. They allow the individual citizens and groups in society to scrutinize decisions affecting them. The strategies we've collected here are no silver bullet, but they can provide media outlets in similar circumstances with inspiration on how to deal with these challenges. And they can help media organizations and policymakers with knowledge of what efforts can be effective and should be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, team, and you can stop sharing the screen. So that's, yes.
Stop share, there we go.
So we're now moving to Renata Nicolai. Renata will now give a very brief input about what actually the European Commission has already planned and is doing to support media freedom. And then we'll also be a participant of a panel discussion where she will be able to refer to what journalists and MEPs say about it in more detail. Renata, the floor is yours. And Renata is the head of the cabinet of Commissioner Jourova.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thanks already for the interesting description on the project. I would like to kind of, kick off by saying that I really think that Europe is at a crossroads when it comes to media pluralism, because as we have heard from previous speakers, we are seeing worrying trends. We are seeing that in the annual briefing that we get from the Media Pluralism Monitor. We are seeing it from the cases that were mentioned when it comes to murders of journalists within the EU. We are seeing it because we have a digital transformation that has a huge impact on the media sector. And we have seen it in particular in the COVID context, it was mentioned earlier as well, because we saw a huge reduction of the ad revenues, which is in particular a challenge for local media that was also stressed just in the presentation. So we have quite a kind of, worrying situation at our hands. On the other hand, there's also momentum, and there are a lot of new initiatives. The first first momentum is that we have, for the first time in the structure of the EU Commission, a vice president in charge of media policy. That kind of, and that is Madame Jourova, who can pull the strings of all the various aspects of the media policy things that we have to follow if we want to have a holistic approach. And I think we have already shown with the first initiatives taken by this Commission that we mean that seriously. Just to mention a couple, and I will be brief because we want to enter into the discussion. We have, last December, as part of our digital kind of branding that we do in this digital transformation, part of that is also the European Democracy Action Plan. Never ever has the EU felt the need to come with a clear plan to nurture and to defend democracy, but that's a testimony of how we see the situation, that there are worrying trends also in the broader democratic space, and of course media is a key pillar in that, and if we don't kind of defend it, then it might shrink also in that regard. We also have a new kind of initiative that is the annual rule of law report that looks at the rule of law situation in all 27 member states, and for the first time we take a very broad approach to rule of law that does not only look as effective and independent justice systems or at anti-corruption strategies or other checks and balances, but it has as a fourth aspect also media pluralism and media freedom. So we will every year report on trends in member states on that, which is quite crucial. And we have issued the Media Audiovisual Action Plan. So it's a really holistic approach, which because the action plan, the Media Action Plan, looks more at economic recovery of the sector, which is equally important as to support the sector of media as a pillar of democracy. So I would say that the Commission really takes a holistic approach to the media sector with the challenges, but also with the needs to act. And we see already first follow-up action. Just to come and to name a couple, we will after summer come with a clear recommendation on safety of journalists. Something needs to be done. This is not a situation that we can afford to simply, continue to exist after the events that we saw. We will also come later this year with a SLAP initiative. This is a complex matter. We will have to look at where our competence allows us to also come with legislation, but I promise that we will come with an effective package to address this phenomenon that is, has a chilling effect on a lot of the journalists who just want to do their work. And also in the context of the broader fight against disinformation, we every time kind of, make clear that you cannot have a holistic societal approach to effectively fight disinformation, in particular online, but not only online, if you don't also support, critical media at the same time. We also stress very, very strongly that there is a need for support of media. I just want to highlight again a couple of points. The Creative Europe program, for the first time, has a cross-sectoral strand. It's not a lot of money, but it is money, and we want to use it well. And we are finalizing this now, and then the program can start and the projects can come in. Also the News Initiative, really an initiative to try to get loans backed by the InvestEU structure to do that. And the third point, and that's very, very topical right now, we take this huge money in our hand in the context of the recovery plan. All the member states are doing national plans. There is a 20% target, for instance, to use the projects for digital transformation. And we have made clear, Madame Jourova, Mr. Breton, again and again, in the context with member states, that the cultural sector in general, but also the media sector in particular, should not be forgotten in this. Last 2 points from my side. I can promise you that we will take a very sharp look at the implementation of the rules that already exist. And here, I mean, in particular, the Audiovisuals Media Services Directive, with which we did a huge step forward in terms of independence of media authorities. This was really a game changer in the last mandate. And now we have to make sure, as guardian of the treaties, which is one of the roles of the European Commission, that we really watch member states whether they apply that. That can be a huge pressure point to deal with some of the shortcomings in some of our member states. And as an outlook, I think after 1.5 years working in the media policy sector, we are clearly stating that there are shortcomings in the toolbox that is at our disposal. And that's why together, Vice President Jourova and Commissioner Breton are thinking ahead and are thinking about, developing what we have called the Media Freedom Act, which would really be a new tool. We are still in the process of brainstorming, but it would be a new tool that really takes due account of the fact that media has a role in democracy. And at the moment, with the tools that we have in the telecoms rule, in the licensing rule, in the state aid rules, very often we just don't match the kind of criteria or the thresholds. And that would give us a better tool to kind of at least play our role in addressing shortcomings and difficult trends when we observe them in member states. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And Renata is not disappearing because she will join us very soon at the panel discussion, which we will lead with two journalists, but also directors of media outlets, of course, Anushka Delic from Slovenian Ostro, and Tomáš Bodoky, director of Atlazo in Hungary, as well as Ramona Strugario, member of European Parliament and co-chair of the Media Working Group. And I'd like to switch our conversation to journalism now. So, Anushka, Tomáš, you have heard how many wonderful plans the Commission has set up, and they're truly amazing, to help media in Europe. In your daily work, in your daily investigative work to hold responsible for the account and to deal with shrinking civil space, how much of that support do you feel from the European Union coming to you? How much professionals in your field are actually aware about these instruments coming to support them? And of course, what else do you do to really stand strong against the possible limitation of democracy in your countries? Anushka, would you want to start first?
Sure. Hi, very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Let me start at the end. So we're talking about tools which sound really, very, very needed and great, but let's see. I want to see what this looks like in practice. At the moment, I have to say that coming from a small country that is literally peripheral unless we have an unruly prime minister or a migrant crisis at the border, the opportunities to finance nonprofit or independent media in a tiny country like mine are extremely, extremely small. And so we, of course, welcome any kind of new avenues that would open. However, since these are supranational institutions, things take a long time. And for us, actually, last year, it almost looked like it's going to be too late because the government will try to help us to be financially unstable. And so we had to fight for a year to try to stay afloat, and we did. But had we come from a more, let's say, well-known or interesting country, I think maybe we would have less problems. So even though we're a micro-regional investigative journalism center covering both Slovenia and Croatia increasingly, I have to say that we are sometimes not really attractive either to private donor organizations that usually have focuses elsewhere in candidate countries, and which is great, lately in countries that had that journalists. And so you mentioned, Mrs. Nicolai, the digitalization need under the recovery program. I have to say that we still have to see this from our government in Slovenia. As far as digitalization goes, they are establishing a council for this digitalization, but I have to say that so far that looks kind of an oxymoronic institution. Let's see what happens. However, in the plans that were presented, I can't really see media needs anywhere. Quite the opposite. As some of you may know, the current government in Slovenia has been pressing down hard on independent media, and actually just it's now, well, a little over a week ago, an unprecedented campaign started to basically help the Slovenian press agency, which is a government-owned institution, stay afloat because the government has not been paying it money. So they went into an unprecedented crowdfunding campaign and managed to gather, I think, around 190,000 euros right now, which is amazing, I have to say, because we've been trying to crowdfund and fundraise in Slovenia from, readers, and it's really hard because the understanding really has to also be there in the public to the understanding that nonprofit media and independent media also need a diversity of funds, and that actually reader support is often very, very important, not so much maybe in the sense of scope, financial scope, but in all other senses. So yeah, so I think that these kinds of events are extremely worrying, that a state-owned national press agency has to crowdfund to stay afloat in the middle of Europe.
And Anushka, because I also wanted to be a bit solution-oriented, as we all know about lots of problems we all encounter as media, but what are practical solutions that you think could be in place for the media practitioners to feel it's real, that it's attainable? What would you suggest? Crowdfunding is one, but this is mostly dependent on your readers, right?
Yeah, you're asking me about the media practitioners, literally journalists and editors and media
editors. What would they consider in Slovenia as a practical help to them coming from the EU? What could the EU do more?
Well, I think the EU has been now doing something, but the problem is that, at least in our case, and I'm pretty sure that there are similar situations in many other European countries, the disintegration of media freedom and the media environment has already been in the works in our country for many, many years before the crisis. So what happened with COVID is that it just solidified it, and it made it much worse because of the disregard of the government for all things democratic, it seems. And so it's kind of it's a state that we've been in for many years in Slovenia. We have been attacked by actually the current ruling party, regardless of whether it was in opposition or position. The problem is now that it has megaphones. And so its attacks are more effective. And so I'm not really the one to say what kind of solutions. For us, I just worry that the interest in Slovenia will subside 31st December 2021 when the Slovenian presidency is over. That's what I worry about. I'm very grateful for all the focus on Slovenia. It's very, very much needed, but we've needed it before and it was not there because we were just not as I guess, worthy of attention. I don't know. I mean, I have to say, coming from a small country, the perspective is a little bit skewed. So yeah, that is a big worry. I think that it's extremely important for all institutions that can come and knock on the door of this government in Slovenia, that they do that. Because it's also important as a signal to journalists and media practitioners, editors, that they are not alone. They have their colleagues in Slovenia, but we feel a little bit powerless given that this government is extremely arrogant and shows every day the complete disregard for democratic norms, which includes independent media that, of course, can also be critical to the government, which is kind of the point of media.
Well, thank you very much, Anushka. I think you've answered it, and if not, I'm sure there will be more opportunities to exchange. And now we're moving to the country, which cannot complain that it didn't receive enough attention from both the European structures and other medias. And sometimes it seems that anytime anyone wants to say about problems with the media sector, they somehow in the EU move to Hungary. So Tomáš Bodoky from last show, sorry for pronouncing, and previously from Index, could you say what exactly you guys do, also with the new media outlet, to resist this pressure and indeed to follow up whether the EU is doing enough and whether you see any specific help coming to your sector from this new instrument that have been rolled out? Please unmute yourself. Yes.
Yes, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. So we are a small non-profit for investigative journalism. We have been founded in 2011, so it has been already 10 years in this outlet. And I have to say, I have to second Anushka that we didn't really feel the support of the EU or sufficient support of the EU, neither financially nor in a vocal way. So as you are probably all of you are aware that the Hungarian government in the past 10 years built out some kind of a totalitarian media system in Hungary. So it's not true they don't like the media. They like the media very much and finance a lot of media, which they own and they control. And they don't regard us as media or any independent outlets or journalists. They don't regard this to be media. They try to frame us like political actors who are partly foreign funded, partly part of the political opposition and want to do harm to the country. So that's the framework we are operating in Hungary. And this also means that they are attacking the EU constantly. And I didn't notice the EU fighting back, or not much, and defending its values in Hungary. So as for the financial side, we are very small, so we don't have access to EU funds. These EU funds are mainly distributed in Hungary through the national government or any EU country. The national governments distribute EU funds, and in Hungary, only media outlets or media companies who get supported by these funds have to be part of the pro-government media system, or they have to make a deal with the pro-government media system not to attack them or criticize them. So for us, it's out of question. We won't get any EU funds which are distributed by the national government. We have access to some cross-border funds and EU-funded grant makers, but these are small grants, and these require cross-border collaboration. While in Hungary, we realized that in the recent years, it's much more important to do local domestic investigations, and there is much more need for local critical journalism. So cross-border projects are nice and they are necessary, but it will not solve the problem that critical media is silenced and pushed to the marginalized in the country.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I understand well, some existing EU mechanisms such as cross-border collaboration, which may work at some places, may be not enough for Hungary because it's local journalism that the government is afraid of most, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's an interesting perspective, and I'm sure there is a lot of space for reflection on that. So I would like to give a word now to Ramona Strugariu. She herself comes from Romania, right? And also knows a lot about troubled media situation in the EU member states and co-chairs the media working group at the European Parliament. So Ramona, you heard the introductory speaking and you heard then the words for media practitioners. We still don't feel it. We can't yet touch this support. How the media working group and how the European Parliament can help in that way? Can you also bring some relevant examples from your practice?
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation. Very happy to be here with you and to have the opportunity to work on these issues, as a matter of fact. I had prepared some some lines to present the work of the Parliament and the ongoing processes and so on. But I would rather refer to some of the issues that I have heard during these discussions than to pure numbers and moments. Because I think they are critical, and we need to talk about them. That the Parliament since 2013, and I heard our colleague from Hungary saying that it has been deteriorating for a while. Anushka as well mentioned it. We were calling back in 2013 through a resolution to have support for the press. Then we were back in 2018 stating that we definitely need actual support and financing for media and mechanisms to prevent media concentration and so on. Then last year in November, we had an own initiative report on media freedom and hate and disinformation. I was rapporteur to that report. And then in the past days, basically the own initiative report of the Parliament regarding SLAPs started, and we had a really good discussion about it in the Libe committee. Now, there are a lot of arrogant governments. I fully agree with Anushka. And this whole story of media pluralism and rights and freedoms and the way governments address it has been a learning lesson for the European Union, I think for us and for the Commission as well. And I did hear that we and the media outlets do not feel it, and it is not there yet, and it is very little being done. Well, this is precisely what led us to a package that it is true, it's on the table now, but you will see its effect and its impact in the period to come and in the years to come. The reality is we did not have it before. And we have been navigating through these learning lessons slowly and not as we should have, and not probably by looking very carefully at what is happening, addressing it with instruments in due time. But I'm truly happy to see that at least we are moving things now, that we do have the Democracy Action Plan, that we do have the Creative Europe with more support, that we are finally able to propose pilot projects, and I did it, my colleagues as well, to finance investigative small media outlets. I actually tabled such a project now for local media, small independent local media, that we are looking at other ways and more concrete ways to support this whole process. And I'm also grateful for the commitment of the Commissioner for this topic and for the fact that she understands it. Because as you rightfully mentioned, there are unfortunately, among decision makers and politicians, very few people still who truly understand the purpose of independent media, because independent media criticizes. It does not take one side or the other, and of course, governments don't like it. Yes, there's no magical toolbox for this, obviously, but looking at more concrete ways to do it and examples from these countries and my country as well. Preventing media ownership concentration and concrete measures to address this. And here I also see some comments about national medias or public medias financing small media projects. Well, we should be careful about that as well. What kind of national media? That controlled by those arrogant governments, or private outlets controlled by those arrogant governments? Not exactly. So maybe we should think of some associative environment of the way that small media outlets could associate together so that they could access bigger bulks of funds from the European Union. Maybe we should think of tailored financing for media, particularly dedicated to this kind of media outlets, through umbrella organizations fighting for media freedom and independent actors involved along the way, so that they could access this kind of funding without going through any kind of national owned or influenced structures. Because in Denmark, public funding for media functions, and I have these signals from journalists working in the field. In Hungary, in Poland, in my country to some point, it brought really major trouble to the system. Then the European Commission and us, basically, we're not only looking to ways of financing, but we're also looking at rule of law, which definitely has to do a lot with the way things have been deteriorating with the media landscape lately. We are looking now at the financing of political parties and how we follow the money, including on platforms, and the responsibility that the platforms have, so that we could have a better control of things, or to contribute better to media freedom. Then clear and strict rules for these independent national media regulators, and here we know very well that the absence or blurriness of such rules contributed to severely deteriorating the media landscape as well. Romania has been confronted with this kind of issues for a long time, and I'm not looking only at recent examples. Diana Oniciu, independent journalist, small platform, revealing on social media how people break rules and how restaurant owners break rules, received a tremendous amount of hate speech and threats, because she actually stood up and had the courage to reveal this kind of things. Let's look at proper ways of addressing hate speech and attacks, and the possibility of reporting and checking, even in marginal languages, how these algorithms function, how we can remove hate speech. Then the same journalist is in the middle of a huge trial, along with some colleagues, small media platforms, sued by a bishop in Romania, former bishop, because they revealed rape and sexual abuse with minors. These are big things. Ana Poenariu, another journalist, recently sued and Rise Project, that you probably know, Investigative Media, one of the most prominent ones, because they were discussing how illegal businesses with medical equipment during the pandemic operated in Romania. Is 260,000 euro approximately an amount to pay by a journalist, single journalist, revealing these kind of things? No. And this is not acceptable, and this is why we need to address this with SLAPs, with an anti-SLAP legislation and associated measures, possibility to finance this kind of legal support, with the issues that I mentioned earlier, with true protection. Because like I said it in the Libe committee yesterday, the media landscape is dying, but it is not dying alone. Democracy is dying with it. So this is something that should concern us all, from public expenditure to the way politicians abuse of power and conflict of interest and all of these dirty political tools to change the democratic landscape, not only the media landscape. So
I
here
would
we
be
are,
serving a bit of a
issues
censor so that
yes.
we just don't run over the time. But Ramona, thank you so much. You've raised so many aspects of this seemingly easy issue of protecting media and journalists that I now feel really sorry for Renata. I don't know how actually the European Commission is able to address all these aspects, but if you could provide brief feedback to what you just heard before we move to the questions and answers section, where everyone would be able to speak a little bit more.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's very important to have an open debate about that. And I think I agree with, what Madame Strugario just said. We are moving, but we are moving slowly. It has taken us time to kind of, to realize the impact that we are observing in many member states on the media landscape. But we are finally taking action. I mean, it's not the first time that, we have developments. I mean, the media, just to give you an example, the Media Pluralism Monitor came about because, of media developments in one of our founding members a decade ago. So, I mean, it's not the first time that we look at that, but I think what we are seeing at this stage, and this is also because we are part of a transformational digital transformation of our societies and economies, is that if we don't act now, there's a real kind of, risk that the public space for democracy that is so necessary is shrinking really. And in that, the media plays a crucial role. I don't have answers to everything that was raised, but to the address of Tamás, our Hungarian colleague, I would strongly disagree with you that we have not done anything. I mean, I happen to work for Vice President Jourova, who has been rather outspoken about, concerns that we see in the country best, and that has been blamed for it, quite directly, and in my view, not always in an appropriate way. I mean, just to give you the recent example of the club radio, we have immediately addressed the issue. We are working on an infringement. We are looking into ways how we can react to that. Yes, if you see some of the developments that we saw in Hungary in the recent kind of years, KESMA, just to mention that, that's exactly the kind of structures, you're falling under thresholds of certain kind of, European existing rules, which are made for the internal market, context, but that don't help us to address the issues, then that's why I think we have to start thinking a little bit, do we need maybe new structures to kind of, help us to address developments that are, have an impact on media pluralism because they lead to state concentration or to state subsidization, that we could address in a form that is in line with our competences. I'm aware of the kind of the context here we are also in with regard to the treaty competences, but I'm sure there is a momentum at the moment with the support of the European Parliament, with the mood also in the Council, because in the General Affairs Council, we look at rule of law matters now regularly, and that includes media landscape. And I think so we really moved this, from a debate that was maybe only dealt with by very, very few to really to the political radar screen of the European political landscape. And I think that's an achievement in itself. To our Slovenian colleague, I really, really want to kind of, reassure you that this is not an issue that will only last for 6 months, because of the continuation, that we have built in with the annual rule of law report, with the kind of, implementation of the existing directives that we already have, the Audiovisual Services Directive, just to name one, with the kind of the new possibilities that were also mentioned by Madame Strugario, Creative Europe, the pilot projects. I think we have really already quite a number of tools at our disposal, and you have a strong Vice President in the Commission who will not shy away from addressing concerns whenever she sees that. What we saw on the State Press Agency was an unfortunate development. We have done our role in clarifying that there was no limit to the Slovenian government to continue to pay. But of course, there are limits to what we can do. We cannot pay, and we should not, because honestly, that's also not the rule of, European institutions to get into the kind of, directionist kind of, interference in national states. But I think we have a good combination of meeting of minds, both in the Commission, in the European Parliament, and I feel more and more supported also by the Council and the Council of Ministers in that, to continue to move forward. It might not be fast enough for all of you who are dealing with the shortcomings on a day-to-day basis, and to need courage to continue to do your job. But we are there to follow it and to fully use the potential that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Renate. And I would like to follow up with the question that is coming from the audience. I will make a brief summary of some questions asked. And the issue is, and then Anushka, there will be also a question to you and Tomasz, and you will be able to react to what Renate and Ramona said. So some countries like the Czech Republic are worried, or media there, that, okay, maybe the previous ones didn't get help soon enough because the instruments were not there in place. But what if the next country in the European Union slides back? Other ways to set up some emergency fund, some emergency scheme that would temporarily allow for media to survive and thrive, because if you kill a media outlet, starting a new one, it requires a lot of efforts and a lot of trust building. So what is discussed about it? And yes, that aid should not be distributed by national states, because as it was said very correctly, if the national state already wants to suffocate press freedom, probably it will not be very impartial in how it distributes the national aid. Who wants to start, Ramona or Renate?
Yes,
Ramona.
I'm sorry. I was trying to find my mic. One of the ideas that I've been a major supporter of, and I must admit that I know it's delicate because we kind of received this feedback also from journalists stating that we need to be very careful with the financing. But one of the ideas that we're supporting is this permanent financing mechanism that maybe could be thought of or addressed in situations of emergency or in complicated situations for certain member states, when the national landscape is so deteriorated and affected that really the small media outlets are not able to find a way. So I stick to the idea. I do believe that we should look into this kind of funding and use it particularly for the type of projects that small media outlets, local media develop. So that is something that has been on the table for a while, not for a long while, but a rather new idea, and I'm encouraging it. I hope that we will be able to implement it at some point.
Thank you. Renata, would you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe just to add that I also would agree that we are not yet at the end of our conversation on what is the best structure to kind of support civil society, media, and member states. I think we have made, as was said earlier, a huge kind of, step forward with the MFF, with the Creative Europe, with the kind of, possibilities that we have in this, with the news project that I mentioned. But I think I would maybe add another aspect to that. What I find also from a systemic point of view, really, really important, and that's the kind of the work on the annual kind of rule of law report, really to engage with the institutions in a regular debate on rule of law matters. I mean, I think, what was wrong in the past, that we saw these rule of law matters. And as you know, I mean, media pluralism, media freedom is part of that broader concept of rule of law, because it's part of, the pillars of democracy and checks and balances. And what was the problem is that it was, we pointed only to the kind of the problems when they were already becoming big problems. The idea with the annual rule of law report is to have more of a preventive kind of early warning kind of approach, to actually kind of bring everybody up to the level of knowledge about developments in member states, so you can capture the developments maybe before they become real problems, because of course we have changing political landscape, changing governments all the time in our member states, and to have that continuous kind of discussion to make rule of law more of a normal policy that we need to look at, like we look at the macroeconomic performance of our member states or other issues, and that can be discussed also in the fora of the council or in the parliament on a regular basis. I have strong hopes in that, because we saw now 2 debates in the General Affairs Council on the rule of law reports of last year, and we saw them on on countries such as the country I know best, Germany, or Denmark. So we looked at their rule of law reports, and the issue is that there are things to be discussed for each country. Yes, we have some countries where we have bigger concerns than others, but a lot of member states face challenges because we're dealing with a challenging time that we are in, and I think that would allow us maybe to react also earlier. It will not help when you have a deep problem, but maybe by that culture, that common culture of rule of law that we need to reestablish and reconfirm step by step, we can have more of a common ground to deal with issues before they become problems.
Well, thank you very much. And Renata, what you said, that actually media pluralism is part of a bigger rule of law conversation, brings me to the 2 questions that were asked towards our participating journalists, which is, you're not in a vacuum. There are civil society organizations, there are human rights defenders, there are different other interest groups or advocacy groups that operate in the countries where you work. However, of course, sometimes for the media outlet to side with an activist organization might be a possible threat to credibility. Do you consider yourself as able to cooperate and collaborate? I know some of you already are non-profit, but still larger with the NGO sectors in your countries. Do you consider yourself also players in the election campaign if the government will be spreading the narrative that, okay, strong rule makes people live better, so just vote for us? What is your attitude to that? And then, of course, please address the comments that you've heard back from the European Union.
I've been trying to go for a while, so I'm just gonna overrun you, Tamas, sorry. And we have like 1 minute, so I will be quick. One, we're journalists, not activists. We are happy to advocate for media freedom and so on. And we're happy to have, let's say, arm's length collaborations with NGOs, but this is not really our core business. 2, I forgot to stress right in the beginning, that actually, I keep hearing here, projects. It's not about projects. European independent nonprofit media need core funding, not projects. We will get project money. Believe me, there's plenty of project money actually, but if you need core funding, you're not going to go for project funding unless you're about to die. So please talk about core funding, not projects. It could be like project type, like fact checking, but don't put in a ton of limitations in there because people will just not be able to apply. Let's not talk about the bureaucracy of the applications. Let's have another session for that. Third, media pluralism. I am wary of hearing the word media pluralism because in Slovenia it has been since the first mandate of Janez Janša and SDS completely disintegrated into specifically and only political pluralism that the powers that be sell to the public as media pluralism. So it's like a trap, in like a public discourse trap, basically. So I would steer away from media pluralism, just saying. And then just to address Ms. Nicolai's point, yes, yes, the European Union is doing something, yes, but it's way too late for people on the ground. And yes, it's great to have conversations about the rule of law. It's great that you are pointing it out. It's great that you have visitations to the countries, but for countries like Hungary, things have remained the same on the ground and worse for years and years and years. So it's great to have this rule of law mechanism, but so what? Pardon my French, because like if something doesn't happen at the end of that discussion, and sorry, rule of law cannot be really equal to economic development. It's kind of the base of the European Union. So if we do not stay true to our convictions, to the principles that we adhere to, and rule of law should be probably at the top, then what's the use of all this? So we need to really, I mean, the thing is, all the discussions happen, but once there is a need for action, the MEPs will make sure that there won't be any. So
okay, this
please,
is yes.
Yeah. So those are my points, and I will
put actions towards, and I will, well, Tomasz, you will have to be the one saying whether you want to side with coalitions of NGOs, of human rights defenders, and maybe even politicians when trying to fight for the joint cause. What is your attitude to that as a media professional?
Okay, just 1 minute. I want to second Anushka totally, so that media pluralism did not cease to exist recently in Hungary. It has been a 10 years process, and there is this ongoing monitoring and discussions and debating. And of course, I am aware that the commissioner stepped up and she was smeared badly in the Hungarian pro-government press. And this is something she could experience. We experience it since 10 years and on an ongoing base. And at the end, nothing happens. So I don't see anything what this government wanted to achieve and could not achieve because the EU stepped up. So monitoring is not enough. It's definitely not working. So about the collaborations with NGOs, we did collaborate with some NGOs, anti-corruption NGOs, and environmental protection NGOs on certain issues, but again, we are not politicians and not activists, so we see our role that it is to expose wrongdoing, and we expose the wrongdoing, and then to do some campaign. It is up to the activist organizations. And one more remark, that in Hungary, as well as the media sector is occupied by the government, also the NGO sector is occupied by the government. So there are countless government organized NGOs which will act like NGOs and support the government, and at the same time the critical NGOs are marginalized and threatened.
Thank you very much. And I've been just reminded by Hisham, our technical host, that we still have limited time here. So Viola von Kramon, MEP, also a member of the Media working group. You've been listening very attentively, and I saw your head nodding so many times when you listened to the speakers. So I'll give you the floor now for conclusions and a closing statement. And after that, if any of the speakers still has some final 20 seconds to say, you will be given this opportunity. But now, Viola, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, for the invitation, for hosting this, and thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity. While everything is already said by all of my colleagues, especially by Tamas and Anushka, I'm very much impressed, and I really can only share my frustration with the situation, which Tamas, as rightly said, has started right after the first election of Orban in 2010. I do remember his first attack was against media, independent media. His first legal moves were against independent media. So it is, of course, very much, let's say, releasing or a positive signal from the Vice President of the Commission that she finally recognized, not she, but the Commission recognized that media policy is a crucial pillar for democracy, but it's much too late. I mean, the media landscape is already completely eradicated in Hungary, and of course we follow the situation, and it's not about a broader discussion of rule of law anymore. It's history, and so I fully share Tamas' perspective of we need easier funds which are permanent, allocated to some qualitative independent
we didn't switch you off. Okay.
No, it was somebody calling me. And the situation is really not just concerning, but it's catastrophic in terms of independent media. And as you said, I mean, you are attacked not as only a journalist, but as an activist, which you are not. So everything which is written in the study is highly appreciated, but it is a question of how we gonna define qualitative journalism, independent journalism in Hungary, and how can we make sure that these funds, which are supposed to be distributed among this independent media, end up really there in the hands and in the offices of this independent media. And the same is true for Croatia, the same is true for Slovenia and all the other cases which are named in your study on one hand and which were named here today. So recognizing is one thing, being concerned about club radio is perfect, but it's definitely not sufficient. And we preach to the converted. I guess that many of our audience knows everything which was said here and will agree. So my problem is more how we gonna reach out to those politicians and to those groups and to those oligarchs and to those foundations of Mr. Orban and others, where we really would make a difference. How can we make sure that the Commission put a foot in the door and that they do not let it happen once again? And as somebody said, if another case will come up and will deteriorate or erode in terms of real media diversity or pluralism, what can we do? I mean, just talking in this little circles is nice to have, but it's definitely not enough. And so I would like to see the European Council having a broader debate on this and really having what we tried with the budget of the European Union, put a foot in the doorstep there. But nevertheless, I think the situation in Hungary is already at a status where I think some other emergency measures and activities would be necessary. And of course, I fully share all the proposals which are made from Tim's side and in the study. They are very valuable. But for some cases in Hungary and in other countries or states, it might be already too late.
Well, I hope that together we still can break this wall. And now, thank you, Viola, very much. I would like to give every speaker not more than 20 seconds, like your last sentence, anything that you want to say to finish today's session. Please, Ramona, you were the first.
Yes, please bear with me because I must say these things very quickly. Funding. It is not about the amounts. small in independent media does not need huge amount. It is about accessibility, the possibility to access fast this kind of money. And here, core funding versus project. When we organized the first discussions, and I was part of them, some of the voices coming from the journalist state said, be very careful with the direct funding because this is a major problem. Involvement. There's not a single time when I said to the commissioner or signaled threats on a journalist's life, situations, complicated situations, Serbia, Slovenia, and so on, when the commission didn't react and the commissioner didn't react. When we wrote to the council saying that the journalists are being tracked through the perm reps in a democratic space, the reply of the council was, it is not our business to comment on what media states, and we don't know whether it's true or not. So these are two very different approaches to the same problem, and we need to deal with it as well from the political level. Last but not least, the reality is there's a handful of people addressing these things, and we need to work together. We do need to work together.
And we will. Renata, would you want to add something?
Yes, I did not mean that on rule of law, the only way is to have dialogue. But I think it is important to kind of also try to have preventive steps and to avoid problems in the future. But I want to stress that, in how we deal with, issues of rule of law, we have infringement cases brought against Hungary in the last couple of years in a remarkable way. Value-based infringements, which have never been addressed in the same way, whether you take the Central European, university, whether you take the NGO law and so forth. And also, let's not forget that we made a huge step forward with the budget conditionality mechanism that is there to kind of be used in the future. So we need both. We need kind of dialogue because we need, as Madame Strugario was saying, we need to kind of bring the institutions together on this. But on the other hand, we also need to be tough on our response. And in our response arsenal, we have already developed issues further, especially in the broader rule of law context. And that's what I meant with the Media Freedom Act. We also on media policy need to go a step further.
Okay, Anushka, anything to add as the last 20 seconds?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to start the timer, but about core funding, Mr. Gario, it's just as problematic as project funding, same problem. The thing is, this is what the actual needs are on the ground. And I think I was at that European Parliament session I think that was 2 years ago that we talked about it. Doesn't matter. So anyway, core fundings for sure. Security is one thing that I did not touch that Mr. Kaza was speaking about. And I just wanted to point out in this given context, when you talk about security, and Mr. Kaza said you cannot assure 100% that a journalist will survive. I agree, that's obvious, but maybe we can go 90%. And then, so how is a journalist going to be protected in a country where the police that is supposed to protect them, if necessary, is usurped by the ruling party? However, there is a good case in Italy. Journalists have protection, 24/7 protection there. And they've survived several governments. So, maybe talk to Italy about how they do it, but it's necessary to assure security. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushka. And it's very important aspect. Tamas?
Okay. My last word would be that it is very important to support and fund independent journalism, but I think it's even more important not to support and fund the totalitarian propaganda machine, because in Hungary, the government pours astronomical amounts of state taxpayers' money and including EU funds and EU support into building a totalitarian media machine with a lot of outlets and occupying the public service media and so on. So I would be very grateful if the EU would not support that financially.
Tim, would you have any other final comments?
Yes, thank you. We've heard that the situation is very severe, but we see that through their own hard efforts, despite these challenges, there are independent media that do still exist. We've heard through here in these countries, mainly because of their own inventiveness in dealing with these challenges. Of course, it's important that the European Union and other policymakers counteract the concentration of power illegal actions by national governments. But I think it's also important to recognize and to stress this, the inventiveness of these media outlets. They're truly the experts on how to counteract these challenges. We should learn from the challenges that we've collected from the strategies that they've applied, that we've collected in the publication, and support the effective practices that independent media outlets are already applying.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone who overstayed 15 minutes of a webinar. It's almost impossible in the current Zoom era, which means that the discussion was really engaging and that was really important for all of us. I do hope that the future joint actions will be also including journalists, the same way as you discussed with the institutions, the journalists and civil society and independent media support organizations like Free Press Unlimited will also be there. So thank you very much, and let's hope for the best for the free media.